Welcome, everyone, physically and virtually, to the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. My name is Christopher Sands. I'm the director of the Canada Institute here, and the least important person you're about to hear from, because I've never been elected to anything except student council once. But these are people who have not only got a lot to say about Canada-US relations, but they have a lot to say about how Americans and Canadians are thinking right now, and it's a real privilege to be able to have them with us. If you're watching virtually and you're feeling like, oh, it's not as good as being there, you will understand how our first speaker feels. Senator Amy Klobuchar is joining us remotely, but we can see her and we can hear her. Senator, can I ask you to open up with some remarks for us?
Well, of course. And I met with the Canadian delegation just a few hours ago with Mike and John, Michael and John, longtime friends. I actually have done a lot of work on Canada for years. As they say in Minnesota, we can see Canada from our porch. And I think I see his bill there, Congressman there, very good. We also have worked together on these really important issues. And my number one issue right now is these tariffs, just because even putting aside the Canada part of this is just, I see this as so detrimental to our economy. We have just come out of a pandemic a few years ago. What we should be working on, in my mind, is things like workforce and the fundamentals that go with that, which include childcare and housing. I think we need to focus on the debt instead of adding to the debt. And I certainly don't think we need more uncertainty, especially for my agriculture community. And I know that just off the press that the president agreed to exemptions for the automakers because of the supply chain issues for the Canadian tariffs today. And I also know the president wrote some what I consider not so helpful tweets about his discussions with Prime Minister Trudeau. But all of that aside, I am continuing to focus on the larger issue of these tariffs and what this means. And we can exempt industry after industry, which of course is good for the industry that get exempted, but that's not going to do anything for my farmers, soybean and corn, who rely on Canadian potash and are going to be greatly hurt by this. As we know, the ag industry operates on small margins. Our farmers and ranchers, particularly the small ones. I'm the ranking Democrat on agriculture right now, so that's foremost on my mind, as well as our all of our manufacturing. And I hope that your panel does discuss. I met with the Canadians about security this last week with our version of the Homeland Security Secretary. And I know the president is focused on fentanyl. I've been long focused on fentanyl myself. And I know that they pledged to do a lot more, but I think when you look at the numbers, I was just looking at the numbers the Canadians can share on what's happening at the northern border. I believe that should not be the reason to put a 25% tariff on one of our best allies. So just a few more points on this front. Canada. President Harry Truman once said Canada's relationship with the U.S. Was compounded of 1 part proximity and 9 parts goodwill and common sense. I couldn't agree more. For more than 60 years, our interparliamentary group, the longest serving interparliamentarian group, has been addressing issues that you have with a neighbor, everything from dairy to softwood lumber to beef and cattle to during the pandemic, the border crossings, to better infrastructure at the border crossings. But in the end, all of this, we cannot forget that this world's longest land border, 5,500 miles, with 400,000 people crossing a day, with fueling a $3 billion a day trade relationship, benefits both countries. Overall, Canada imported over $354 billion in American goods in 2023, and the U.S. imported more than $418 billion. That's why when you look at those numbers, these tariffs are going to be very, very harmful to the U.S. economy. This isn't a chisel, it's a sledgehammer. One of the things that sort of confounds me, and maybe Bill will be able to answer it, because is the USMCA was one of the president's crown jewels, that in the Abraham Accord, when I was running for president, when I wasn't in the snow, on the debate stage, I was the first Democrat to endorse the USMCA in a negotiated agreement, and worked really hard to make sure that Canada was part of that agreement when for a while they were out of the agreement. And I think that is a place to have these details negotiated. And I think the final thing I'll just say is that this isn't some partisan thing. So many of my Republican colleagues, including Senator Mitch McConnell, who serves on the Agriculture Committee, have been very clear that they are opposed to these tariffs. And I think it's about time that Article 1 means something with Congress. When I chaired President Trump's inauguration, I made very clear at the beginning that the reason we have an inauguration in the Capitol is because instead of a gilded presidential palace like they do in some countries, is because we actually believe in 3 equal branches of government. And so Congress needs to stand up. We know how the tariff law works. We know the president has the power to do this. But if this continues, we're going to have to do something ourselves. And one of the things that I like to emphasize about this, in addition to the obvious security partners, allies, is what American businesses have said. The National Association of Manufacturers warned that this is going to put American manufacturing jobs at risk. The American Farm Bureau warns that they threaten to deliver another blow to the finances of farm families. National Association of Home Builders said they will increase home prices by raising the cost of construction materials. I note that the cost of lumber in the last month has already gone up, one time 9%, then I think 17%. U.S. Chamber of Commerce, not exactly a liberal group, has said the tariffs will only raise prices for American families and upend supply chains. So I'd rather much be in the friend group of Canada and Mexico and our European allies and Japan and South Korea than over with Russia and North Korea and Iran and China, whether it comes to the ongoing war in Ukraine and trying to bring peace there, or whether it comes to our relationships economically. I always remember, and I'll end with this, the embassy draping the banners, the Canadian embassy, at a time when a lot of people were shying away from being friends with America. Canada's been there for us. They were up there for us after 9/11, helping us out every step of the way. They partnered with us in conflicts around the world, and they were the ones that displayed those banners for years that said friends, neighbors, partners, and allies in their very prominent and beautiful embassy in Washington, D.C. I want them to be able to display those banners again, because those 4 words have always defined our relationship, even when we have disagreements about hockey games. By working together, we're going to ensure that that relationship continues strong. Thank you very much. And I know our staff's going to listen in on the discussion. I have to leave to go to something, or I would be there with you today, but I want to thank you, and I'll listen in as long as I can. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. And you had to bring up hockey, didn't you?
I just had to.
I'm going to turn now to Senator Michael MacDonald, proud Nova Scotian, to take us to the next step. You've been here as part of this delegation, your observations on where we are.
Senator Klobuchar, my good friend Representative Bill Uzenga, Dr. Sands and colleagues. I want to thank the Wilson Centre and Wilson Centre's Canada Institute for hosting this important discussion. I've had the honour to serve as the co-chair from the Senate of the Canada-US Interparliamentary Group, known as the IPG, for over a decade now. I'm joined today by the House co-chair of the IPG, the Honourable John McKay, as well as fellow Senators Robert Black, Andrew Cardozo, Roger Kusner, and Marty Deakin, and members of the House of Commons, Vance Badaway, Ari Kuzmierczuk, Brian Massey, and Simon-Pierre Savard-Tremblay. Through the IPG, we have had the opportunity to meet our U.S. counterparts for frank and open discussions, to find points of convergence, even during complicated times. For example, at the time when the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, was being renegotiated, The IPG regularly visited Washington to advocate for the importance of free, fair, and mutually beneficial trade between Canada and the U.S. That period of renegotiation led to the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, the USMCA, or CUSMA, as we call it in Canada. In January 2020, President Trump characterized that agreement as, and I'll put this in quotes, the fairest, most balanced, and beneficial trade agreement ever signed into law. Well, that aged well. Trade agreements are not just about commerce. They stimulate productivity and economic growth, foster investment, and strengthen supply chains. In the long run, they shape the prosperity of countries. And the CUSMA has provided a stable and predictable economic environment to help businesses in all three countries grow and prosper. Yet, we are at a time when discussions about free trade have shifted to discussions of trade war. Concerning tariffs, there are lessons learned from the United States' imposition of steel and aluminum tariffs in 2018. Those tariffs did lead to approximately 1,000 more U.S. jobs in the steel sector between March of 2018 and November of 2019. However, an analysis from the Federal Reserve Board of Governors found that the increased cost of steel and aluminum resulted in a 0.6 decrease in manufacturing jobs that rely on those metals as inputs. That's a total decrease of 75,000 manufacturing jobs throughout the U.S. In other words, a net loss of 74,000 jobs in America. Currently, Canada and other U.S. allies face more tariffs. These will increase prices for citizens on both sides of the border. Affordability, including energy reliability and affordability, is one of the key priorities of President Trump. I would like to take this time to highlight Canada's important role in contributing to American energy security. In 2023, Canada supplied 60% of the United States crude oil imports, 99% of natural gas imports, 85% of electrical imports, and 27% of uranium imports. These volumes speak to the importance of Canada as a reliable partner for the U.S. to meet its critical energy needs. As we have met with our congressional counterparts here in D.C., topics such as energy security, border security, economic security, and North American defense have illuminated our conversations. So I look forward to an open discussion on these issues and more this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. And now I'll turn to my fellow Michigander, Bill Huizinga.
Thank you. I appreciate being here and being a part of this and truly being among friends, some people that I've known for many, many years. I think of people who we've worked with in the past, Wayne Easter, who's with us still, I'm sure, in spirit, because we could probably still hear him yelling at us. And people like Gord Brown, and who have departed, these are long-time relationships, and no offense to my staff who has prepared some great remarks. I'm going to probably speak a little more from the heart and just make some observations as well. And obviously, Senator Klobuchar had to leave. She sort of rhetorically.
No, I'm still here. I enjoyed the Wayne Easter joke.
Oh, there we go. All right. Well, the photo, your video is
I'm
gone.
Listening.
Great. I'll still say the same thing to my friend Senator Klobuchar. The observation about whether I would have some more insight. Not much. Here, let me check Twitter. No, and not anything new since the last announcement as we were walking in, where the president had put the 30-day pause. I had a chance, in all seriousness, I did have a chance to talk to Howard Lutnick a couple of times yesterday and last evening. As well as some other folks from the administration about what is going on, and we have been expressing some of our issues and concerns about where is this going and how is this playing out. But I think we are really, and I know you are in Canada as well to a degree, but we in the United States are having some political realignments. Here is a major one. The United Auto Workers completely and wholeheartedly support what the President Trump is doing. Now, CAW, my understanding, Canadian Auto Workers does not. So we have a divide within that already. But the statement, if you read the statement of the UAW, they are very clear about their support of what is going on. Same thing among steel and aluminum companies and the unions that support them, the mining unions, the lumber, the log haulers, the folks that work in the paper mills, all those kinds of things. And there's a fundamental shift that has started. What I don't know is whether it's going to maintain and be permanent or not. And some of those political alliances that have been developing over the years are kind of coming to fruition. And there's definitely some shifts that have gone on. USMCA, as we call it, CUSMA. I was thinking actually a great acronym might be CAMUS. In Canada, let's have a little wine, break a little wine, a little bread, and might ease a few things. But there is frustration with some of the things that have happened outside the USMCA. We still were not able to tackle the dairy issue. We still have softwood lumber. These are issues that were an issue back when I was a staffer 25 years ago. But the digital services tax was something that got a lot of people's attention as well, and not in a good way. So the call for how do we stick to these negotiations is a fair one. I think, though, are we going to stick to those negotiations? And I won't mention names about a meeting who I had where someone was questioning whether we could be trusted as a country moving forward with further agreements. I have great confidence. Having been a staffer when NAFTA passed, and saw the reaction of what was going on at that time and the calls literally from Bill Clinton, who signed it into law, on through Barack Obama saying we are going to renegotiate NAFTA, and it never happened, to the renegotiation of NAFTA that did happen with President Trump. I know he feels strongly that there was some backsliding within our government and the administration, the Biden administration, about enforcement of a number of things, and he wants to change that. That is his prerogative as the president to move forward. But we know that we still have some issues that have to be dealt with, and I know some have called into question this whole idea of what the dangers of fentanyl that are coming across both southern border and northern border. And by the way, I know Senator Klobuchar, if she's still listening, she can see Canada from her porch. Well, we go east to go to Canada from Michigan, right? I was meeting with some folks, and I said, any state that you can go east or west, don't have to go north to Canada, you have a pretty good understanding of what's going on. But today, Grand Rapids Police Department, second largest city in Michigan, of which I had, my district, my riding is just outside that area, had a 1 pound bust of fentanyl and 250 grams of heroin. It's the largest single fentanyl bust that has happened in the state. The second largest, also happened in my district, the corridor in between Detroit and Chicago. There is belief that is not just all coming from the southern border. And there is a serious issue that has to get tackled by that. So I don't want to lose the no soft lumber pun here intended. I don't want to lose the forest through the trees on this, because we know that there are some great things that have happened with our relationship. Vance and I had a chance to do a joint press conference at one point about the announcement of what is the equivalent of our Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, a program where we put in $500 million a year. I think Canada was 420, is that right, over 10, but it's a start. And we know that we have joint concerns there, whether it's Great Lakes, and so the economy and the ecology of both of our countries there on that. We have the ability to move forward, and as I said to both of my friends yesterday, the time in the middle of a crisis is not the time to build a relationship. That's when you have to lean on a relationship. And I'm hopeful that the relationships that we have are going to be fruitful, that we're going to be able to lean into those relationships. I know my predecessor, Peter Hoekstra, former ambassador to the Netherlands, my former boss and then predecessor in this seat, is going to be the new ambassador to Canada. That I think will be a positive thing. He has an understanding. He has a manufacturing background. He was with office furniture maker Herman Miller, but obviously representing the area. We have all the Tier 2, Tier 1, Tier 3 automotive suppliers, the agriculture that's there. He has a rich understanding of the economic relationship that exists between our two countries. So I believe that this is more than just a negotiating tactic by the president. I believe he is serious. He wants to move the needle. We will be seeing where this goes and see how leading into April 2 and the tariffs, the reciprocal tariffs, what conversations are going to be able to be had. I hope that they are going to be fruitful. I have confidence in our team that they will, and hope the Canadians will be as like-minded. So I'll turn it back.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you very much, Congressman. And now I'll turn to John McKay, who I think in some ways is you're like a one-man diplomatic corps. You're friends of so many things, NATO Parliamentary Assembly, you do U.S.-Canada, you do U.S.-Europe. So I know you'll give us a global tour d'horizon.
Not that many people describe me as a one-man diplomatic corps. That's usually, there's some other word that's in there. Yeah, diplomatic doesn't immediately come to mind. Yeah.
Diplomatic as a brick.
Yeah, that's right. At least it gets your attention. I just want to pick up on Bill's comments about relationships in the middle of a crisis. It's not a good time to try to build relationships. It's good that this association has existed for many, many years. And Bill, I want to recognize, along with Amy, both your contributions over the years to this association. And I think, frankly, has taken the rough edges off a number of issues. But we are in a very different space. We are no longer just taking rough edges off little irritants. We are into a major and significant realignment of the relationship. But I thought that what we should start with, since there does seem to be a favorability to renaming things that have had long-standing names over the years, we're going to, Bill, rename the Canadian goose to the American goose. And we're going to reprogram it so that it does for your lawns what it does for ours.
We've got plenty of them that stick around.
Yeah, I see. Well, you don't need to thank me for that. Yeah. So this has been an interesting couple of days. So I guess when we arrived, just as we arrived here on Monday night, the tariffs came on at midnight. And then if I'm given to understand, the latest is that they're off, or some of them are off, or maybe some of them are off, which kind of is a bit of a metaphor for the difficulties that we face when going to various offices. I did, however, get some insight into the difficulties of your Republican colleagues yesterday, Bill, when after visiting with you, we visited one of your colleagues, and he was, I would describe as a true believer in the vision of the president. And frankly, the start of the meeting was not entirely friendly, but civil. And interestingly, he had brought with him to the meeting one of his constituents. And one of his constituents runs a plastics business, a very significant plastics business that has significant trade between Canada and the U.S. In fact, the individual described himself as a partner in a Canadian company in Toronto. And he had said over the course of the day, he'd spent many hours with his Canadian counterpart trying to figure out how these tariffs impact his business. And they thought they'd kind of whittled it down to an acceptable level. But nevertheless, it did speak to the, one, the difficulties it was going to be for this congressman's constituent, but two, it was an education for the congressman. Because I don't think he necessarily appreciated that these tariffs were going to impact specific businesses in his district. And he does, his district does significant business with Canada. So if nothing else was accomplished, this particular constituent landed points that we couldn't land, which was that this is going to have significant impact on Americans. And I thought, if for no other reason than if we accomplish nothing else, that was a significant meeting, because it speaks to the core issue that as a Canadian, I can come into your office, Bill's or Amy's for that matter, and say, well, we got an integrated supply chain, and that that 25% tariff will blow a huge hole in the automotive industry, and et cetera, much like the Ford CEO said. But until it lands in the lap of, or in the shopping basket of, or the bank account of American constituents, I'm not convinced that things will change, because the President is pretty dug in on his position. But I do want to acknowledge, Bill, also that your work with Ludnick. You mentioned that to us yesterday afternoon, that you had been in conversation with him, and I'm not familiar with what the latest is, but it does appear to have at least postponed some of the more egregious aspects of the tariff on the automotive industry. The other area that, and this is particularly applicable, I guess, in Senator Klobuchar's area, is the importation of potash. 71% of the potash, U.S. consumption of potash, comes from Canada. The alternate suppliers are Russia and Belarus, which in the current environment may be attractive. I don't really know. But on the assumption that there is a preference to a Canadian supplier over a Russian supplier, that is going to impact your area, because you're fairly rural. It would impact the Senator's Minnesota constituents, and of course anyone who grows corn in the United States. It's not nothing, and it does add to the price of a bushel of corn. So I just, I think it's useful for Congress people and senators and others in the administration to appreciate that the actions will result in significant costs to Americans, and when those costs actually start to land in the grocery basket or in the factory floor, then maybe there will be a change in attitude. The second issue is on fentanyl. I think I shared this with you, Bill, yesterday. It was a 1% problem, and it has been reduced by 89% over the course of the last few months. It's not even small potatoes. None would ever say that any fentanyl is not something. But if you're going to apply resources, and we all have to figure out where we apply resources, this is not necessarily the one. And and the other aspect of it is, if this is a border negotiation, we're as concerned about fentanyl and migrants coming into Canada as you are concerned about fentanyl migrants coming into the United States. But at this point, it does appear to be a one-way street, and it does appear to us that there's little effort on the part of American border authorities to address the issues that we have, which is arguably more migrants coming from the United States into Canada than going south into the U.S., and the scourge of the gun culture, guns on the streets of Toronto in particular. So we're open to negotiations. I think Michael rightly talked about there are mechanisms in CUSMA, USMCA, call it what you wish, NAFTA 3.0, pick your name, that would address specific irritants. It's hard to know how to move forward in this particular environment where we are under a constant barrage of tariffs. Yes, today, no, tariffs are postponed 30 days. No, they're back on. Yes, they might be 25%, but no, we might go 10% here. The other day will be 15%, and now we're back off. It's you know, if this is moving the needle, this looks a lot like a Geiger counter. And I frankly don't know how this is considered to be a negotiating technique. If I was going to say, if this is the art of the deal, I think that we should have a second chapter on how to negotiate with sovereign nations. So let me stop there. After coming down here for something in the order of 20 years, this is the most fraught state of the relationship that I can see, have experienced. I would like to think that this association would contribute to the resolution of whatever disputes we would have, but frankly, this is no way to go about it.
Thank you very much. And I have to say, one of the things that happens if you have a little health scare is you suddenly become more aware of all the pieces that go into your health. Sometimes a little bit of a tough time can be a time to really understand what we all rely on. So I appreciate the candor and also the goodwill from everyone so far. I want to ask a question of all of you, and we'll open it up to the group, really about the IPG itself, this interparliamentary engagement. I think you've all given us some examples for how your work with each other is starting to bridge some gaps and helping us to understand how we can solve some of the problems that are emerging. But can you talk a little bit about the concept? And I might pick on you, Congressman Huizinga, first. Just like, why do you meet? You've got so much else to do, and you want to meet with the Canadians, you want to meet with others. Like, how does that help? Is it helpful to your constituents? Is it helpful to the country? And how do you conceive of this kind of a function?
Yeah, despite, to John's quip, despite all this, I do still want to do this, yeah. Look, it is vitally important. Again, we are even prior to any sort of NAFTA. I mean, I was a staffer when NAFTA was negotiated and first put in place. We all in Michigan knew the importance of the relationship. It wasn't as integrated, certainly. It was maybe a little more exotic to go to Canada, and we'd still be excited when we found the Canadian quarter.
At that time, it was at par.
It was at par. It was at par, and now it's definitely not. But it is. Look, if you're not talking and not having these relationships, how are you supposed to figure out whether you're going to agree on 5% or 15% or 50%? So to me, that is a worthwhile endeavor. If I have a regret, it is on our side, meaning how the Congress's side. We do not go to Ottawa often enough. I think all of you would agree with that. Interestingly enough, for me to take a trip to Ottawa, even as chair of the IPG, I would have the hoops that I would have to go through for approval through the Foreign Affairs Committee to be able to have that happen were extensive. And Amy Klobuchar and myself led the only joint delegation that we had had in many, many, many years to Ottawa back, somebody help me out, 2014, 15?
13 maybe?
Yeah,
something like
I
that.
mean, it was a good 10 years ago. And that was because of some disagreement between the House and the Senate, whether we would actually participate together. But I know you all as MPs and senators, you have it literally in your budget to come down to New York and to Washington, D.C. We do not have that same type of mechanism. And so I think we should be up there more often. And I hope we can rectify that. But the importance of the IPG, again, is, I think, to be able to get through those times when you have difficulties. And USMCA first go around, or Kuzma first go around, there were some pretty tough conversations, and Lighthizer was had some, as I understand, some interesting things to say in his book, and those kinds of things. But it was a 6-year agreement. Now the question is, are we going to be able to get this to continue on? And I hope we can. That the status quo is certainly not where President Trump is, and I applaud him for that, because status quo has brought us $36 trillion of debt here in the United States. It has diminished us, I believe, internationally. It has caused domestic problems, and he is bound and determined to rectify that. The policies on the southern border absolutely have affected us on the northern border. 2/3 of all of those who have been captured that are on the terrorist watch list have been at the northern border, not the southern border. It begs the question, okay, how many of them were not captured, right? And where was that? I don't believe that it was, I believe that the southern border became such a distraction. In fact, I know this when my wife was going in, getting her Nexus card, I was with her. And as I talked to the Border Patrol agent, I said, do you mind if I ask a couple of questions? And he was like, sure. About 2 questions in, he looked at me and he goes, what exactly do you do? It was, I told him, and I said, sorry, I hope that doesn't get you in trouble with your supervisor. He said, no, if my supervisor was here, he'd want to be in a conversation. And this guy had just returned from a 6-month rotation down at the southern border. And I asked him, okay, has that damaged us on the northern border with your ability to do the job? And he said, absolutely, 100%. So we know that there has been issues that have been internal to the U.S. Domestic situation that have affected the northern border, and I think that's one of the reasons why when we look at that, I know whether it is fentanyl or whether it is those folks coming across the border, I've done some fairly extensive research as to how you get your farm workers. It's very different than how we do. How others are qualified and come into Canada. It's very different than how we do. And that I believe has been part of the push that President Trump has been putting out there.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Congressman. Senator McDonald, I'm going to ask you a little bit about the economic relationship. You and I have been sort of talking a little bit here. At the level of your community on the Canadian side of the border, how do people understand the economic relationship and the linkages? I've gotten used to supply chains as a term, but there's a lot of invisible connections between our economies. How do people talk to you about tariffs, but also about how our economic partnership should grow?
I think it depends what part of the country you're from as well, initially. Being from Nova Scotia, we're one of the few provinces that doesn't touch on the American border. And I noticed the difference. For example, Brian Massey there at Windsor, he's just in the he's in the headwinds of trade, right? There's so much trade going across that. I think when you're geographically in certain parts of the country, I think you have more of an appreciation for it, as we do in the extremities of the country. I don't think there's a particularly sophisticated appreciation for trade in the country. I think most people see it in pretty simplistic terms. I think people take a lot of rightly so, take a lot of our trade relationship with the U.S. for granted because it seems to work well. And it has worked well, and it's grown for, I've said this again before, but I'll say it again, ever since we built the Seaway, our trade has just expanded exponentially, and with very little negative feedback. So we all find this a little disconcerting. I still think, I'm still very hopeful that things will come out in the wash here. When the tariffs were first mentioned 2 months ago, and I said to people, I don't think you're going to see tariffs in a month. I just think there's too much at stake, and it's such a complicated trading relationship that it's very hard to dismiss it quickly. And of course, there were no tariffs. They were threatened, but there were no tariffs. So now we just find out that there was hesitation again.
Can I be clear?
Yes.
What I had read was that it was specifically auto-based.
All right.
So I'm assuming that means suppliers and not just finished product and things go moving back and forth related to autos. And sorry, Michael, and again, I think that is because there is a view that there is compliance within USMCA on that segment. That is what brought the pause.
But again, it also speaks of how complicated it is and how nuanced it is, that it's not a black and white thing. I just want to mention a couple of things that Bill mentioned about your visit to Ottawa. It was so great to get the congressmen and the senators up to Ottawa. It was great to see them relax. They can't relax here when the House is sitting or the Senate is sitting. They're being pulled in 100 different directions. We appreciate that. And it was a great 2 days with great discussions, and it was good to see the people here able to let their hair down a bit and have candid discussions. And
We ate poutine, so it was pretty good.
And I do want to just mention one more thing, because I haven't heard much of it in the press, and Bill touched about it, and that was security. And I think if I can put it this way, I think that the fentanyl I think security is an iceberg, and the fentanyl is the 15% that floats above the water. But there's the other 85% we're not talking about. One thing about security, I think we have to be candid about this in Canada, security is never top of mind for us because we've always had the security of American support and American supporting our security. But I think security is top of mind with Americans and American administrations. And I think that Canada has to get their head around that. I think we're obliged to do that, because if it is your top priority, I think we have to share that with you and be cognizant of that, respectful of that. So I think there should be more discussion on security.
Dr. Sands, I just wonder, sorry to interrupt, but I understand the congressman has to.
Yes, sorry.
The congressman has to leave in about 10 minutes, and I wonder if we might just get a couple of questions with him before he leaves.
If he's willing.
Fire away.
My one question would be, you talked about the president wanting to move the needle. I wonder if you could just share more with us about what that is and what you want to move the needle, or he wants to move the needle on. And are we talking primarily about tariffs and the border not being the main issue?
Yeah, I think what Michael is touching on is something that, was primarily focused on Europe, the security side, right? His last go-around, his last administration. And again, as I said, my predecessor, who's going to be, the ambassador, Lord willing, with the Senate's approval, which I don't think is going to be a problem, all he talked about when he was in the Netherlands was Netherlands NATO commitment, right? And that was a constant theme for those of us that were traveling to Europe. The fact that Canada has been short on that for decades is problematic for many people as they're looking at an institution like NATO or NORAD or some of those other protective umbrella organizations that are looking at the security. So that should not be dismissed or I think underappreciated. Have no doubt, though, President Trump's stated goal, look at any one of his myriad of rallies or myriad of impromptu press conferences. By the way, somebody counted it up. He has done, this was like of a week ago, he had done over 1,000 press questions, and you compare that to any of the previous last 3 or 4 presidents, they were somewhere in like 120, they were at a tenth of it. So I mean, he is about as open as we have ever seen of any, I think, candidate that's been out there. And his stated goal is he wants things back here in the United States, back in America. He'd like to do all of it, right? And you know, we've had the lumber discussion, right? Well, there's a reason that the U.S. is, I would argue, by the way, family is in home building. Ready Mix Concrete is a company that my dad and uncle started. I have a cousin who owns that. I own our sand and gravel operation. I still am actively doing real estate developing. I know what happens with lumber prices. I knew what happened in COVID when suddenly, you know, there was a $35,000 increase just in supplies to cover costs. I'm very sensitive to that. But we here in the United States, whether it's in our mining or it's in our lumber or a number of other things, we have not utilized our own resources and have become dependent. And so I think that's why last night when the president's talking about energy or mining and rare earths or other things, he is going to push on that. That's been a frustration, and I would argue it's a little like what the Europeans do, right? You know, we're talking about Russian boycotts of oil and energy and all the other things, yet what was Germany doing? What was the rest of Europe doing? They were funding the war in Ukraine by having to buy their gas and oil from them. So, you know, we in the United States were a net exporter at the end of the Trump administration, and we have he's bound and determined to reverse that. Right? We're going to utilize our own resources. He wants jobs to be American jobs. That is maybe not viewed as fair, but that is what he wants. He wants as many American jobs as he can possibly get. I think that's why you see the UAW in support of what he is doing. You know, that is a long-time argument that many within the union movement have had, is they've been frustrated that these jobs have been moved offshore. My Irish Catholic side from Flint, Michigan, my grandfather was part of the first original sit-down strikes that happened at Oldsmobile. So I've got cousins on that side of the family, UAW retirees, Communication Workers of America retirees. I mean, these good, solid, salt-of-the-earth union households. And when I've got a cousin of mine who I would never, ever describe as a traditional Republican comes up to me and says, "Hey, are you taking care of my president?" It's like, okay, are we talking about the same guy? Are we on the same page here? The same team. That fundamental shift that's happened. So I think is real. I think the president has been very clear. He would like to have as much production within the borders of the United States as he can possibly get. That's why he's pushing Honda, to come back to the United States. That's why Taiwan Semiconductor is making their announcement of a $165 billion investment. Apple, for crying out loud, $500 billion. If you want access to the U.S. markets, he is going to argue that it needs to be built here, if at all possible, built and produced here, if at all possible.
If I can jump in as well, Christopher.
Yes, Vance, but
Bill, we've done a lot of great work together throughout the years. And a lot of that is because we've been spending a lot of time together, whether it be here in Washington or back in Ottawa, or by phone on many occasions. A couple things. One is that I was asked yesterday from a Republican member of Congress, what do we want? And I'll be blunt and candid with myself. What we want is that if, in fact, it's the intention of the President of the United States to renegotiate the USMCA, then say that and do that. let's all put our big boy and big woman pants on and get around a table like this and deal with the very issues that you're speaking about, instead of doing it in an ad hoc way. That's what's happening right now. It's being done in an ad hoc way. That's not proper business. You know that, I know that, he knows that. So let's get around a table like this and deal with those softwood issues, and deal with the auto issues, and deal with all the issues that, quite frankly, were a part of his agreement. Number one. Number two, with respect to what we should be doing as soldiers to our leaders, is dealing with the issues that are pertinent to your districts, our ridings, our constituencies. The things that matter to people most, the things that touch them every day. Number one is affordability. Tariffs don't create affordability on either side of the border. They create the opposite. Second to that is, from the business side, the supply chains. Again, that's how you create jobs. That's what we as government offer those in business as a resource, is the capacity. And therefore creating the fluidity within our supply chains. And our supply chains, Bill, can't be manipulated. Supply chains are where production and sales happen. Just connect the dots. They don't stop at borders. They're fluid across borders. So I go back to what I said earlier. It's up to us to create that capacity vis-a-vis capital investments. It could be transportation. We live in an area that's multimodal, robust, water, rail, road, and air. And then therefore fluidity. It happens over your border every day on the Ambassador, my border, the Peace Bridge between New York and Ontario. And then the second part of that is then therefore what it creates. Jobs, economy. We're integrated. We have been since the Mulroney-Reagan days. It was supported then, it's supported now. So I go back to my first comment. If in fact it's the desire by the President to renegotiate USMCA, then let's get to the table and renegotiate USMCA, and then therefore it'll deal with the very issues that you have been highlighting for the past few weeks. Bottom line, let's get to work.
So Congressman, I know that you are time limited. I think that's what that bell was about.
Yes, actually,
So-
sorry, that was a reminder of a phone call I was supposed to be making at 3 o'clock, which will wait for a few moments, but, so.
Okay.
If I don't know if we do it quick and.
This
we can
MP,
wrap up.
Eric Kumirchik, sorry. Let him get a question in, and we'll let
Got
you
it.
get a response in before you have to go.
Okay.
Thank you.
And then it'll be way better. You can talk about me after I leave. So it's great.
Thank you very much. Is my mic on or? Oh, there you go. Just wanted to say thank you to the Wilson Center. Just start off. You provide an invaluable service at this point in time. Just wanted to say thank you. I wanted to take a second to talk about integration really quickly. My family loves to vacation. I'm from Windsor. My family vacations at Oval Beach, Saugatuck. We like to go to Holland at Butch's Dry Dock, best pork chop and hanger steak in the Midwest. And we stop by Meyer Gardens on the way home. And that's an example of integration. A lot of folks from my community do the same. During COVID, you had 1,600 Canadian nurses that live in Windsor, cross the border every single day, and working at Henry Ford Hospital, keeping those hospitals working during the peak of COVID. And like heroes, coming back every night, coming home, and taking off their clothes in the garage, sleeping in the garage so that they're separated from their families. And every morning they would make the drive back across the Ambassador Bridge or the tunnel to work in those hospitals in Detroit. And that's integration. And we see that, of course, in the automotive sector as well, too. And we know that these tariffs are going to punish workers, not just on the Canadian side, they most certainly will, but also on the American side as well, too. You will see factories, lines shutting down within days. You will see factories potentially closing, and you will see layoffs for workers, both American and Canadian. And to me, we have a relationship, an economic relationship that is the envy of the world. And I don't understand the steps that the U.S. administration is taking. It's almost The way that I would characterize it is it's the miracle on ice in reverse. You know, before these tariffs, you're up 4-0 in a third period. Prosperity on both sides, economic development, stability, security, and building upon that prosperity. And I see us taking a huge step backwards on this. And our expectation from our community, because of that integration, we want to see our American counterparts stand up for that relationship. We want to see representatives, congressmen, senators from both parties. Let's not make this a partisan issue. It's not a partisan or political issue. This is about a relationship that has worked well for both sides and that we should build upon, not go reverse on. And so I wanted to just raise that, Congressman, and even on the issue of debt. This partnership can help with that. We're your number one customer. We want to keep buying more from American manufacturers. We supply you with cheap, reliable resources that help your manufacturers build more, and sell cheaper. And so we want to strengthen that relationship. We don't want to take a step back. And we feel very strongly, and we hear from representatives on both sides, that these tariffs will set us back and set that relationship back. And you need to know the anger from communities like mine, from constituents that feel betrayed by the measures that are being taken.
Mind if I respond to that?
Yes, I think we have 2 questions to give you something to react to, and as long as you can stay.
Okay, well, is there another question? I can wrap up maybe the answer into that. Simon Pierre?
Yes.
From what I know, my question is more.
Yes.
My question is more a technical one. I know that now it's an executive order, but the Congress can ask to overthrow it. So technically, elected officials can try to regain their rights to have something to say in that debate.
And just any clue you can give us about Ambassador Hoekstra and how we might best interact with him?
Okay. Let me cover the waterfront. Let me start with Simon Pierre here. I'm not sure of the exact mechanics of what that would look like, but I do not believe that you're going to see any effort or any significant effort that's going to do this. And this is going to go to it's Eric, right? To Eric's point. The frustration that your constituents have are the same frustration that my constituents have. All right. And I'm not just talking about my union cousins. I'm talking about a number of people who have felt that the United States has hollowed itself out. Sometimes it had been to China, sometimes it had been to Mexico, but to any place where those jobs had been exported, not everybody has that same view. I find it interesting that so many of my Democrat friends who have been some of the biggest protectionist voters in their voting records are now some of the biggest free traders you've ever seen in your entire life, right? And trust me, it's made more than one head spin when you've had the UAW for Trump guys getting up on stage at a rally talking about how they feel Donald Trump is actually fighting for the American worker. And I believe he is. I believe that is to the doctor's point, that's part of his motivation is exactly that. And I think that is what he is pushing for, and that is where, again, some of this political, we'll see if it's an actual political realignment or if it is temporary politics that some of my friends across the aisle have found some sort of free trade religion. So as far as Ambassador Hoekstra, to give you insight, I was on staff with him at the time when there was the debate about granting most favored trade status, most favored nation trade, PNTR, whatever we just remember the acronyms, right? PNTR vote that happened. He was one of the few Republicans who voted against it. all right? And this was during the George W. Bush era. He has always been somebody, he's been an ally of the Teamsters. He's had a I would say mixed sort of stance within union leadership, but there's been a lot of union membership that has been supportive of him politically in the past. He's a smart guy. You will find him very hardworking. I think that he gets, having been, again, I worked for him for 6 years as his district director. That guy would land at midnight, and I'd pick him up at 6:30 the next morning, and we would have a full day out on the road. He is a workhorse when it comes to that, and I will expect that he will want to have meetings to understand what's going on, but he will not be afraid to push back. And if he feels that the country or the president is getting disrespected, you will know that in a very big hurry.
Good to know.
So
Good to know.
hopefully that gives a little bit of insight. So
Fantastic, Congressman.
Hoekstra, it's Hoekstra. It's another one of us Dutch guys.
Really
Yeah,
Dutch me up.
there in Dutch you're called a stiefkomp, which means you're a hardhead. He's another one. Yes.
Well, thank you very much, Congressman
Okay.
Heisinger. I have to let you go, and then we'll
Great to
keep the
be with
conversation
you,
going.
and let's continue the conversations. We will. The Lions are going to have a better year this year, but. Yeah,
Not the Eagles, not the Eagles, not the
hopefully
Eagles.
our respective countrymen will stop booing the others' national anthems, and we can move on and just let them take care of it in on the boards and
first
have a
minute of the
good
game.
have a good yes. All right.
Excellent.
Thanks everybody.
Thank
Good
you
to be
very
with
much,
you.
sir. And we'll pick up this conversation. Just give us a moment to give Congressman Heisinger the chance to leave the room. Yeah, we don't have a lot of time, and we're broadcasting live, so I don't want to lose the entire audience. Thank you, John,
No.
for moving in.
Yeah, good, John.
Yeah, so I'm hoping to get everybody back down. I know everybody wants to say hello. Everything was. So are you live? We are live. Oh, okay. That's why I turned the microphone off for a minute. Yeah. So you can get this going back again. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. We had to take a brief pause there, but I want to keep the discussion going. We have with us the Canadian members of the Interparliamentary Group who are here in Washington. You've already got a flavor for some of the interesting conversations they've been having around Washington, and obviously the topics of the day are Canada-US relations, from tariffs to security, and so much more. So I want to get us back started, and we have co-chairs, Michael McDonald, Senator Michael McDonald, and the Honourable John McKay, Member of Parliament. And I want to maybe steer you a question about the USMCA review. It's come up a little bit here. Can we stop having a tariff fight and start having a negotiation of the USMCA, making it bigger? What's the appetite in Canada for USMCA talks? Or have the tariffs given people a sense that it's useless because we don't respect those agreements? Can you talk to us a little bit about what you're hearing?
That's kind of where the conversation is going. Like you can't conduct a negotiation or discussion about USMCA, which is a multi-chapter treaty arrangement, as you well know, Chris, with dispute mechanisms built right into it and review clauses and things of that nature. But the distinct feeling is that in all of these 1,000 press conferences, that's the preferred method of negotiation, which is no negotiation at all. We dictate to you what it is we want, and you will comply. And frankly, there are rude things that one could say about that kind of negotiation. If it was such a terrible deal, I don't know why the president signed it in the first place. You know, like this guy keeps telling us that he is the world's greatest negotiator. Okay, well, we've got an agreement that's 5 or 6 years old, and suddenly it's not such a great agreement. And so then layers on a whole bunch of other problems, and maybe I didn't have it. I feel like I'm kind of talking. I would prefer Bill to be here while we're having this conversation, because IPG is exactly the kind of forum where you can do these conversations. And I'll use the example of, you know, Trump saying, oh, there's terrorists pouring across the border. Well, you know, we've had 2 days worth of pretty high-level briefings from people that really should know, and that's news to us. So if you don't have an agreed-upon statement of facts and understanding of what constitutes the information on which you base decisions and negotiations, then it's very, very difficult to get into any kind of good faith negotiations. And, you know, Bill mentioned that I questioned whether there was any deal you cut with the United States at this juncture, and I stand by that. I question the good faith of the United States of America to enter into a negotiation which will at one point be concluded, signed, executed, stamped, whatever, and 5 minutes later, we're very unfair. You know, we're terrible negotiators. So, I don't know where we go from here.
Well, let's go to the Senator. What's your sense of USMCA talks, the mood in Canada, and what you're hearing while you're here?
Well, the mood in Canada is one of a little bit of confusion, I guess, because, well, to be fair, what John said is there's a lot of truth in it. It's hard to negotiate with a bit of a moving target. Although I think we should also keep in mind that the first 100 days or so of a new administration are always going to be, well, they're going to be going at their own speed, and I think that Congress itself will also sit back and see how things evolve over that period of time. So, you know, we're only into the first half of those first 100 days, so maybe patience is a virtue to a certain extent, and, well, patience can be a virtue, and let's just see how this evolves over the next few weeks, and I think there's a lot of balls in the air yet to drop, and we'll have to see how they drop.
We're widening the conversation out to some of the folks here in the room, so if you're watching this, that's what's happening now. I'm going to go to Brian Mass.
Thank you, and thanks again for the Wilson Center for all the work you're doing all the time, not just today, but it's always been a key component of my 20-plus years here, and it's always been a good place for us to come and meet with business organizations and so forth. But, you know, I'm just looking at a couple of media reports coming in on the exemption for the auto tariffs that has been provided for 30 days, and it's not acceptable. It doesn't provide any real certainty. It provides an opportunity for the United States and others to maybe stockpile resources and so forth, and I can't see a reason why Canada would back down on its position on current retaliatory tariffs and dealing with this issue, because it disrupts us from our connections. I understand that the UAW may have taken a position, but my understanding is that there's not that a target to the Canadian CAW because the minivans made in Windsor, Ontario are made with American labor. You know, whether it's crossing the first time across the border, the fourth time, or the seventh time, American jobs are at risk there, because you just can't take $1 billion plant and move it any point in time and expect not to lose your market share and so forth. So I guess the way that I'm looking at this is that, you know, for sure we're, you know, glad in a sense that there's 30 days to stop that edge from hitting the target, but it's not something we should be seeing as a solution or acceptable as a negotiating position, because all it's done is what it did basically 30 days ago, is provide more opportunities to create more uncertainty. Just want to lastly finish up. One thing that I find pretty difficult to take, and something our country I think really needs to take stock of, is that we were down here lobbying for years, being said that, you know, they want Canada to be part of energy security. because they no longer wanted to, buy oil from Venezuela, OPEC, other places. And when you look at the math in terms of what took place, our auto sector, since the last agreement was signed, our percentage actually has gone down in new investment and the overall footprint. We've had some good investment that's taken place in Canada. It's increasing American jobs for sure because of that connection. Just like when Americans get plants, we get jobs too because of that. But at the same time, we ramped up our exports, which are actually creating the surplus that is used as a political wedge against ourselves right now. If we claw back those energy exports, then sure, then we can put the math right out there, is that we are actually in a trade deficit with the United States. So I just think that's an observation that we need to keep in mind, because we came and delivered what was requested of that time as energy security, as opposed to the United States providing resources to other sectors of the world that were doing things that aren't supportive, and now it's being used as a weapon against ourselves. And this delay is somewhat welcomed, but again, it's not acceptable, because in 30 days from now, we will, our country actually needs those 30 days to actually enhance our auto sector right now. But it doesn't change the way that we have to compete against the East when they have 5 million vehicles coming into this area with no American content.
Thank you. Simon Pierre, Savard-Tremblay.
Is it okay with
If it's, press the button, it should.
The light should be green. If it's green, it's go.
No, it's the same as when I talked just before. I never saw the light.
If someone can pass one down, I think that's the only thing we can do. I'm sorry.
Is the green circle right here?
Okay.
And I-
So maybe my question before to Representative Ayazinga was not heard. I was just asking him if, because of the mechanics that permit the Congress to bring this debate and to overthrow executive order about those tariffs, he answered me that he was not seeing this in the near future. But my question would be, maybe Christopher, you're the best one as an observer as a close observer of the political scene in Washington to answer. But maybe my question would follow up to the one I asked before, but would be larger. Do you see in the near future the possibility that the congressmen are just tired of seeing executive order, that there is kind of a reaction where they say, we were elected to take decisions and we take none?
Well, I don't want this to be the Sands presentation. What I will say is that for that, there's one thing that's more powerful than executive order, and that is a statute. But statute requires a majority to pass, and at least so far, I don't know that there's been that stomach. I think that's what Congressman Huizenga was also saying. That doesn't mean it can never happen, but in the short term, I think it's a high bar, and it makes things a little bit more challenging. Nature of the Constitution, energetic executive, and the sort of sober second thought we sometimes get from Congress. So, but far be it for me to do the talking. I know Senator Marty Deakin, and then I'll come back to Senator Black.
Thank you. I won't rewind, but both listening to a variety and diverse opinions of Congress folks, sharing, clarifying information as the very best that we can. And I think also equally, while we are here, and the same thing would happen if Congressman Huizenga can get to Canada, are the hall rooms and the meetings and the opportunities around the Congress meetings. I think those are really valuable and invaluable. And so today, as I sit here and I think about what we were focused on when we were here 6 months ago and what we're acutely focused on today, certainly there's been some drivers to that. I do, however, constantly think about, we know the problem in some ways. We may not know completely the motivation or the ultimate success point for the president, but we're at the point now where we have a decision that could again continue to change by the hour, but we're also going back to our a little bit unstable political environment at this moment. And now we're looking for the proof in the pudding. So now we're looking for impact. Now we're looking for here it is, folks, we're here. So as I'm listening today and I'm questioning is, how can we best go about ensuring we have the impact, the data, the stories in Canada and the United States that does keep the pedal to the metal on this? Because we have to keep the pressure on and strong from both parts, Canada and the USA. So that's where my mind and my energy is okay, we're back in Canada, you're in the office in the States. How do we capture the next 2 weeks?
Thank you. Very well said. I want to come to Senator Black, and then I'll come back to MP Eric Kazmierczak. Sorry about that. I apologize to all Ukrainians as well. Polish, oh gosh. All right. Well, I apologize to the Ukrainians, the Poles, all Canadians. Yes, let me turn this over to Senator Black.
Thanks very much. We heard this morning from a Canadian who came down to talk to a group of business people this morning that with respect to agriculture, livestock crossing the border from Canada is making plants here in the States, processing plants here in the States more efficient, filling those hooks that aren't filled by by American farmers. And we heard him say that within 2 weeks' time, there will be potential processing plant closures. I think that's where it hits the fan, right? And I want to point out that we in the Senate debated C-282, which was the supply management bill, ad infinitum the last few months, and hearing from the agriculture side of things, both the supply managed and non-supply managed folks, they acknowledged that the review is coming up in 2026. There was no, let's stop that, they acknowledged that it's happening. These tariffs, in my estimation, as you've said, John, just do away with that. Like, why bother? That's my 2 cents from an agricultural standpoint. Thanks.
Very much appreciated. All right, Mr. Eric Kazmierczak.
That's perfect. Thank you, Christopher. I appreciate it. And I will say, one of these days, I hope that the Wilson Center will actually spell center correctly. One of these days.
We fought a revolution over that now.
I wanted to say, Christopher, and to those watching, in 2003, Michael Adams wrote a phenomenal book called Fire and Ice. And I know that you hosted, I think, Michael Adams for a discussion about 10 years ago or so. But, this was 20 years ago, and he talked about the diverging values between Canadians and Americans that he was picking up on in his stats, that the values were in fact diverging even then. And they were on an accelerated divergence. And, I'm struck, walking in here, I'm struck by that bronze portrait of Woodrow Wilson, talking about a common enterprise. And one way of looking at American security, American strength, American prosperity, we view it as a common enterprise. Canadians contribute to that goal of a stronger, safer, secure America. We believe that our trade relationship contributes to that. It's a common enterprise. What we're seeing as well is a contrary vision, that isolationism that Michael Adams picked up on in 2003, that growing isolationism. And so I think there's more at play here, it seems. It seems like we're seeing that divergence sort of coming to a head between potentially American and Canadian values. And I'm wondering, is there a way back from that? And especially seeing this rift that we're seeing here through the tariffs, is there a way back? And I think that's something that needs to be talked about is again the diverging values and that isolationism, view of the world as isolationism, America going it alone versus America as part of a common enterprise, its prosperity, its security being part of a common enterprise in which allies like Canada play a really important part. And it's an important question.
Thank you very much. I have Andrew Cardozo who wants to get a word in, and then we're coming to time. I may come back to you last there.
I used to get dumped all the time, yeah.
Well, now we've come to the romantic portion of our discussion. And the only thing I would say in response, Senator, is as we always do, and as you do, there's no one voice for Canada, no one voice for the United States. There's a lot of diversity of opinion here. And so what I really appreciate about you all coming down and engaging with the Interparliamentary Group is finding the dialogue, finding out where maybe the friendship is changing, but maybe it's still there. Maybe it's still there with different people. And so it's that willingness to come and engage, which is something I always admire about the Canadians. And speaking of being willing to engage, we have a really big honor here. It's like having a reunion episode, you know, when you want to try to get the ratings up. We have my predecessor, the great Laura Dawson, Dr. Laura Dawson, who's here. She had the Canada Institute before I did. I'm trying not to mess it up. But she is also somebody who's lived on both sides of the border, has worked for both governments, has seen much in her time. And I thought I would turn to you, Laura, just for kind of a closing remark. I mean, to put this in context, where we are and where we might go. Oh, she does need a microphone. Oh, sorry, when you're no longer on the payroll, we don't give you a mic. No, of course we do.
Thank you
All
so
right,
much.
over to you, Laura.
Green light. That was such a sweet introduction. Thank you, Chris. A couple of quick things and to wrap it up, just on the technical point of will the American government get sick of executive orders? I think the important point, and it ties into what someone said about borders, is that President Trump is using the IEEPA tariff or the IEEPA situation to declare a national security emergency. It's never been done before in trade, and now he's using it, and he's attached it directly to border performance. And so he can use borders and tariffs interchangeably, border security and tariffs interchangeably. And so that's why I think it's really important that Canada
in every way possible, live up to the spirit of that commitment. And I think that Minister McGuinty, who I've been working with closely over the last couple of weeks, has done a really good job. And I think that all of the boxes are ticked, and there's a lot of great conversation between Minister of Public Safety and senior folks at Homeland Security and CBP. So it is important. We can't just say, oh, fentanyl, it's a pretext, forget about it. The other thing I would, two things, is the relationship over? It's bad. I spend my weekends on Canadian talk radio, and people are very, very upset and angry. And that 9 parts goodwill that Amy Klobuchar talked about, I don't know that we have anywhere near 9 parts at this moment. But geography is reality, and we just can't say, oh, diversifying east and west, it'll be fine. And I think we as Canadians have to ask ourselves hard questions like, what are we willing to do on supply management in order to advance the interests of competitive agriculture? What are we willing to do on digital services tax in order to get one major irritant off Congress's lap? What are we willing to do on making forest industry practices more palatable? Not saying throw the baby out with the bathwater, but there are things that can be done. And finally, to the point about, talking to people. 18 months ago, I was addressing the Prime Minister's Cabinet Committee on what to do in the United States. And I said, get people out talking to business, the same as you were describing, Mr. McKay, with the plastics industry. That needed to happen 18 months ago, 2 years ago. I dare say, as a person who's been working the relationship for 25 years, we've had it on autopilot. We have not invested in this relationship. Chris Sands and the Wilson Center are the only major U.S.-Canada think tank in the world. And there's a handful of the rest of us that are out there in the United States promoting the Canadian relationship. If we're serious about this, we have to act like the aggressive trade promoters that other countries are, the UK, South Korea, Japan, Singapore, Mexico. You see those folks in town a lot more than you see Canadians. So if there's a new chapter of the Canada-US relationship, yes, a lot of it has to happen at the US level, but Canada, I think, can do a much stronger job as well if we're serious about it.
That's a fantastic note to end on, because we do have to end the broadcast. But I want to say, Laura, you were an inspiration for me in the way you ran the Canada Institute. And I'm pleased to say that it is still a place the IPG comes back to, and I hope it always will be. This is a place for conversation among Canadians and Americans. I really appreciate everyone contributing. Good to see you, Senator Kuzner, former Consul General Kuzner. It's great to have you back. And we hope you'll come back on your future visits. Thank you all very much.